Today we embark on a cautionary tale of Black success. A story filled with vision, determination, success, and a sad demise. This is the story of Wally Amos. With his business success, he baked up a life of achievement and greatness. I'm Alexander Holmes, and this is Moments in a Black Life. We'll start where the story ends, because it's sad, and honestly, I'd rather just get that out the way first. With the scant-informed idea of selling off stake after stake in the business, Mr. Amos found himself a cook without a kitchen. His shares had been so diluted that he was no longer a part of the business. What's worse, for $1 million, he lost a business that at one point had sales of $12 million. At one point, he found himself using GoFundMe for the roof over his head. It's a cautionary tale, because more often than not, we see innovators who have the talent, the energy, the foresight, and yes, the charisma to make a new thing and make it big. But then they fail to acquire either the skills or the skilled people who can nurture their baby to a full-grown independent adult. That's what happened here. The business was thriving. People loved the cookies. It was a prestige brand, the type of item you'd find in the Neiman Marcus Christmas catalog or for sale in the Williams-Sonoma. But Mr. Amos, the famous Amos, didn't know how to manage. Credit must be given, though, because he did try to bring in help. But he recounts that the more investors he brought in, the more equity he lost, and they never stayed long enough to turn the ship around. But let's put a pin in that and see how Mr. Amos became the famous Amos. A child of the Sunshine State, he must have known the sun would shine warmly on his life. He left his home for his aunts in the city that never sleeps. Harlem, in 1948, was a far cry from the slow Florida pace the 12-year-old was used to. But off he was to a place of possibilities. Unfortunately, he dropped out of high school. So what could possibly come of him? Well, he did receive his GED when he answered the call of Uncle Sam, serving a stint in the Air Force. Alas, he was a free spirit, an achiever for sure, but he needed to be independent to grasp that brass ring. So, in '57, after his time in uniform, he got a job. Of all things, right? It wasn't anything special. He was in the mailroom, although I should give him credit because it was a pretty prestigious mailroom after all. He worked for the William Morris Agency. They were home to big names like Charlie Chaplin, Marilyn Monroe, and Elvis, just to name a few. And well, he must have been pretty good at something because he moved up. And I do mean up, like the Jeffersons way up. He actually became a talent agent, making him the first Black talent agent in the industry. So by now it's safe to say he's doing all right. He's got money. He's definitely got connections. I mean, he signed Simon and Garfunkel, for goodness sake. He worked with all the stars, Diana Ross, Sam Cooke, Dionne Warwick, and the list goes on. This is where things start to get delicious. You see, we're in the 70s now, and Famous, well, he's in LA. Now, his meteoric rise would be met with resistance of a galactic magnitude. Mr. Amos was so bothered by this time at work that he turned to the white stuff, all-purpose flour, of course, and started baking for catharsis. He would bring in the cookies from time to time to meetings with muckety-mucks and other bigwigs who'd always devour every crumb. See, this was his unwitting genius. He took his aunt's, the one whom he lived with in Harlem. He took her recipe and created a need for a chocolatey sweet delight. And he was the only one who could scratch that itch. When he realized what he had, the oven timer went off, and the free spirit took to the kitchen. 1975 would be the year that would change his life forever. It was unnatural how quickly he started to explode. He reached deep into his Rolodex, and would you believe it? Names like Marvin Gaye and Helen Reddy were there, and they came with a nice $25,000 investment. But he didn't stop. He kept reaching and managed to pull other famous names to attend, and I do mean attend, his grand opening alongside the other 1,400 plus people who came out to the gala. The first year he saw some $300,000 worth of cookies move from his oven to people's stomach. Business was so good, and others must have known, because his son recalls being held up a few times. Guess that kind of went with the neighborhood. I mean, it definitely had some flavor, with prostitutes walking the streets and a strip joint just across from them. But hey, you gotta start somewhere. And yet the people came to buy. Mind you, these weren't the cookies we've come to know and love. These were expensive, artisanal cookies, the kind you see in the hands of some hipster, or more likely yuppie, as this was the 70s and 80s. The staples were chocolate chip peanut butter, chocolate chip with pecans, and butterscotch chip with pecan. All sold by the pound. So, sorry, no, I'll take one $3 butterscotch, please. All the years in showbiz really honed his showmanship and made him a natural marketer. The entire reason we know Famous Amos, and it's not just another anonymous chocolate chip cookie, is because he was the first in the artisanal cookie space. And he branded his product with the trademark black bearded man in the shirt and straw hat combo, all capped off by a brilliant and full toothy smile. His industriousness and creativity sparked an entirely new segment in the food market, and thanks to him, we now have brands like Mrs. Fields and other wannabes from Duncan Hines and Nabisco. But he held his own. By 1982, Famous Amos was eating everybody's lunch, to the tune of $12 million in revenue. That must have been some good lunch. The cookies were sold in Macy's and Bloomingdale's. You see what I mean? Upscale. He was even in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade a few times, and he made cameos on shows like Taxi and The Jeffersons. Sadly, though, this is where the cookies started to spoil. You see, the company grew so big so fast that it eventually overwhelmed poor Wally. There's really no other way to put it. He was the creator and the marketer, but he didn't know how to manage. Come 1985, after years of multi-million-dollar sales, the company posted a loss. That's natural. In everything, there's ebb and flow. The confusing thing is, the company had revenues of $10 million. So remember, I said earlier that he failed to acquire the skill or the skilled people who could nurture the business to maturity. Well, this is what I meant. He did look for help. Sometime in the 80s, we know he was selling off portions of the business, no doubt to raise capital and keep the fledgling business afloat. What's not clear is if these sales were just cash infusions or an agreed-upon value-for-value swap. By that, I mean a situation where he'd give equity up for someone else's expertise and partnership. All I can tell you is that it was a clear example that ignorance isn't bliss. Because in '85, he sold a controlling stake to Bass Brothers Enterprises. And just like that, 10 years of work and hardship and innovation were out of his control. His fresh, upscale pride and joy was quickly transformed into the shelf potato 99-cent cookies we know today. He couldn't bear to see its ignominious demise, and 2 years later, Mr. Amos left his baby. It would go on to be sold a few more times, and the recipe would go from upscale designer cookie to down-market mass-production snack, and back up to a more quality product. Ever the entrepreneur, he moved to Hawaii and attempted to start a new cookie company, using his image. Well, that was a flop. If for no other reason than he was sued for the use of his likeness. Contract law, huh? It's a hell of a thing. He went on to try his hand at a muffin company, and that didn't seem to go that well either. While there's certainly more to tell, especially of his post-Famous Amos days, the point of this story is the point of every story we've shared here, where the success wasn't experienced by future generations. A business manager must build their strengths and manage their weaknesses. Countless people have been discussed who built great fashion houses and healthcare companies and so on and so forth, which reached atmospheric heights, but because there wasn't a group of skilled persons to manage the business concerns beyond the founder, they are no more. Famous Amos was a brilliant marketer. He just failed to realize that black businesses often require cunning and protectionism in order to pass on to the next generation. Thanks for listening. This week's episode was produced and hosted by me, Alexander Holmes, with special consideration for research given to Famous Amos, The Rise and Fall of a Cookie Empire of History.com, About Famous Amos, Fame Starts in Hollywood, of famousamos.com. A famous cookie and a face to match, how Wally Amos got his hand and his name back in the game, of newyorktimes.com. And Son of Famous Amos reframes pain into joy in debut novel, of kcrw.com. Please rate and review the pod on Apple Music and iTunes. It really helps get the word out. And since you like what's happening here, please follow on the gram at A Black Life Pod. And we're on YouTube now, so watch at A Black Life Podcast and share it with friends. Next week, another great story about a Black life.